Labrīt visiem, kas šodien pieslēgušies mūsu izaugsmes programmas otrajai lekcijai. Un tā šodien būs veltīta tēmai par to, kā izveidot klientu vajadzībās balstītus risinājumus. Un tā kā mūsu šīs dienas lekcija notiks angļu valodā, tad arī es pašlaik ievadā pārslēgšos uz angļu valodu. So in recent years, findings of several surveys and researches done by Harvard Business School and CB Insights company have shown that one of the main reasons why startups are failing is actually the lack of product market fit. So this means that actually the companies have not done their homework properly and thoroughly and are missing some points why their customers, where their market segments actually don't really need what they are offering. And so this means that even really great and amazing solutions are there when nobody needs them. And well, it's a bit sad. But to avoid it, you can do your homework properly. You can make your customer research, understand what are the value of customers and what really are their unmet needs. And then you can definitely mitigate this risk. And this risk is there also not for startups, but for established companies too, who are now developing maybe some new line of business or trying to access new target markets, create new solutions. And by doing this homework and really investing your time and understanding your customers and understanding and researching their problems, you can, in the end, create really great products that make your customers' life more convenient, easier, cheaper, and more interesting. And so this is what we're going to talk about in our today's lecture. And our today's speaker is Slavo Tuleja from Slovakia. Slavo has amazing experience also with larger corporates like ŠKODA and also working as an consultant, as an outsourced consultant. So he has worked with a lot of companies from different areas. And so he's willing to share his experience about understanding your customers today. Hi, Slavo.
Hi. Thank you very much, Ira.
Yeah, so before I pass this the mic, I would just like to encourage our viewers to put their questions into Facebook comment section, and we will try to answer them at the end of this lecture. So with that, Slavo, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ira. Thank you for the introduction. Hi, and greetings from not so sunny Slovakia this morning. We have about 80 interesting minutes in front of us where I will try to share a lot of my experience, a lot of the work that I've done. And as Ira said, please write down any questions which you might have, and we will then take 10 to 15 minutes at the end, and we'll try to answer most of them, and we'll see where we get. You might be wondering, why am I speaking to you this morning, and why was I selected for this topic? Briefly talking about the experience which I have. Currently I sit in two chairs. The first chair is Cube, which is an innovation studio, and it helps corporates launch new products, launch new services, improve their customer journeys with the aim of getting more customer insights, with the aim of making more money, making the customer journey more appealing to the customers, decreasing the costs of running that particular customer journey. So that's one chair. And the second chair is I'm also CEO of a venture capital fund. It's the biggest venture capital fund in Slovakia. We manage 30 million euros of private money. So we like to say that we're not one of those newly bred government-supported VC funds. So we try to look for entrepreneurs who have a good idea, who have something which already has a bit of traction, a bit of product market fit, and they want to scale that somewhere into Western Europe. What we focus on is, well, we are pretty industry agnostic, so we don't have particular industries that we invest in, but currently we have investment in gaming, we have investment in biotech, we have investments in software as a service, so quite a wide range, and we also are active in Baltics. We're looking at a couple of deals there right now. So that's the two chairs. And now a little bit about how I got to do what I do currently. In the past, I was one of the co-founders of ŠKODA AUTO DigiLab. ŠKODA, you know, the car producer, and they realized, I think it was 2016, they realized that maybe it would make sense to have some kind of a dedicated lab, which is outside of their typical way of working, that would look at the changing needs and requirements of people who are living in cities in terms of mobility. So we were doing a lot of customer studies, we were doing a lot of prototyping, we were doing a lot of launching new products and services. And these you can imagine as things such as car sharing services, e-scooter sharing services, and so on. While I was working there, I was head of customer research and prototyping department. So what we will be talking about today is pretty much what I was doing every day, all day. So I'll be also bringing some interesting examples from that field of work. On the side, I also do a design thinking, or I'm a certified design thinking trainer for Google in Slovakia and Czech Republic. So we do a lot of design thinking workshops. So today I will be sharing a lot of from the experience which I gathered. I prepared a few case studies, but let's first dive into what we are aiming to achieve today. There are three parts to this presentation. The first part is we will think about our clients a little bit. Second part is we will talk about how to get interesting customer insights. And the third part is how to build a value proposition. You know, what is important to say here? We are focusing on business improvement. So business improvement is that we either want to satisfy our customers a bit more, we want to earn more money by improving what we currently have, or by launching something new. And then we're also looking at what is the methodology, so what are the steps that we need to take to do this efficiently and to do this quickly. Because the typical problem with big companies, and I have a lot of this experience, unfortunately, is that when new ideas come around, they usually come in an environment of an office. You know, people sit down and someone says, we should do this, and there is no validation to it. Many times I've seen that the development of an idea takes way too long, you know, so you're preparing it, you're building it for 1 or 2 years, and only then after 2 years you show it to your customers, and well, what if you find out that nobody wants your solution? So and that's exactly what Ira was referring to, that there are many interesting solutions out there, but there are no customers for them. So this is something that we try to mitigate, something that we try to avoid by following a methodology. It might sound complicated, but we'll try to simplify it down to something that is easily digestible and something that you can easily then take action steps from it. But let us start with a short story. This is a company which you probably all know, McDonald's. And there is a very nice case study about this company when they were thinking about improving their milkshake lineup. Just to remind ourselves, the milkshake, it looks like this in its current form, and you can get it in the strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate. And I think in some other countries there are also some variations to it. But they wanted to improve the sales of this product, and they wanted to make it better. So what they did is they went out, they spoke to some people who are buying milkshakes, and they asked them, how would you improve this product? And they fell into the same trap as Mr. Ford was saying, that if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So McDonald's collected quite a lot of feedback, how to improve the packaging, how to improve the flavors, blah, 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 blah. They made all these changes, and guess what? Nothing happened. There was no improvement, nothing. So then they got in touch with some Harvard professors, and they asked them, look, we have this challenge here. We try to improve our milkshake lineup, but the things we have implemented somehow are not working. So what do you suggest? And these Harvard professors said, give us some time. We'll go into a restaurant. We'll watch these people, and we'll see what happens. So they arrived at the restaurant in the morning, and they started looking at people who were buying milkshakes. And they spent the whole day there. And after the first day, they found very interesting patterns. The most interesting pattern was that people who are buying milkshakes, most of the milkshakes were sold before 9 a.m. So in the morning, and I think it was a majority, over 70%, was sold in the morning. First interesting insight. Second interesting insight, most of these people were alone, so they didn't come in a group, so it was individuals. Third interesting insight was that these people just came into the restaurant, took the milkshake, and then drove off. So they either bought it in the restaurant and then drove off, or they went through this make drive facility. So these were the three interesting insights, and they're like, ooh, okay, maybe we should start speaking to them to get some deeper understanding of why is this pattern actually happening. So the next day they stood in front of the restaurant and they started asking people who were walking out with their milkshakes, and they asked them a very interesting question. This interesting question was, what job is this milkshake fulfilling for you? And this is where the jobs to be done theory came along. Jobs to be done theory is telling us that we should look at our needs as some jobs, and we are hiring products or services to fulfill these needs. And these people started telling them, look, I am driving to work, I'm commuting for 1 hour, and I need to eat something for breakfast. And as they spoke to multiple people, they found out that the job that this milkshake is trying to achieve is actually a supplement or a replacement for breakfast, because these people said that on one hand, if they take a banana, it's something that they eat too quickly and they're still driving for 60 minutes. So that doesn't work that well. Another person said that they take some bread and butter, but it's difficult to drive with bread and butter, so it's not safe. Whereas the milkshake is, easy to consume. And then the third interesting part was a person said that, I need something that's giving me enough energy until lunch, but if I take a Snickers bar, I feel very guilty. Having chocolate before 9 a.m., it's not that good. So that's the point where they realized that people are actually hiring a product to fulfill something that they need. And that's a specific need, which is driving to work for 60 minutes, having something that you can eat easily. So, you have a straw, so you just sip it, no big deal, it's safe. Something which you will not finish in under 15 minutes. So if you compare it to the banana, which you eat in a minute, this is something that's it's taking you longer time, which was a positive for them. And it's not making you feel guilty, and it's still giving you enough calories. Although I would argue that having a Snickers bar or a milkshake, kind of the same thing, but if it makes people not feel guilty, it's fine. So this was the beginning of the jobs to be done theory. Okay, so they realized that if I want to achieve something, I need to hire someone or something to do it. So this is the theory of hiring products and services for jobs which you might have. So already when we are discussing it right now, try to think about what you are offering to your customers and what is it that you would be, what kind of job are you fulfilling for them? And are you doing it well? How are you doing it, comparing it to your competition? And how does it all work out? How does it all come together? Because jobs to be done theory is very important when we start constructing our value proposition. A value proposition, and that can be for something new. It can be value proposition for something which we already have and we are improving. But we are trying to identify what is it that people try to achieve and what kind of products and services are they hiring right now. And this is the quote which we use very often when we spoke about cars, and when I was in ŠKODA, there were always people coming up to us, what's the new innovation? You should do this, you should do that, blah, blah, blah. It's not about asking people, how would you make it better? But you're trying to understand what are they trying to achieve. Because if you ask people, how would you make it better? They will give you all these crazy ideas like McDonald's had. For various random improvements, and then you implement those. It's going to take you time, it's going to take you money, and so on and so on. You implement them, and well, what if you find out that there is no need for this? There is no one willing to pay for this. Although people said it would be nice, there is no one paying for it. So we are not going to ask people what they want. we're going to try to understand the context of the way that they live and of the actions that they do in order to achieve whatever they need to achieve. If I would have to illustrate it on a little bit different slide, I would show you this. You know, the customer is buying pieces of products, but in the end, they are paying for a skateboard. Okay, so they want something which can move them around, which solves their mobility needs. And although they are buying those components, the job that they need to fulfill is mobility, and for that they hire a skateboard. They're not hiring individual wheels, board, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, so this case study has shown us that it's very important to understand what the customer is trying to achieve, what is the context where they're trying to achieve this, how are the competitors looking. Okay, so how is the second best option or the third best option or whatever they are doing right now in order to do it, how does it look, and what are the benefits of that and what are the drawbacks. So when we look back at the McDonald's case study, you know, they listed few alternatives. Bread and butter can be a replacement, banana or a Snickers bar, but each of them have some unique advantages and disadvantages. And compared to all of these three, the milkshake is superior. Okay, so the milkshake is something that solves all the problems which all the alternatives have. And this is something that we want to achieve by doing exercises such as the ones we will speak about today. We want to achieve that we have a product or a service that customers like and that is answering the pains that they have with the current alternatives. It sounds complicated. There is a methodology to it. Okay, so now that we kind of set up the idea that we need to find what our customers are trying to achieve, then we need to follow a few steps on how to get there. The first thing that we need is some kind of methodology. We will speak about this on the next slide. Then we need some customers to speak to. That's very important because if from our experience at the Innovation Studio, we found out that if we don't speak to customers and if we don't go out into the field, we usually don't have interesting insights to build solutions upon. Okay, and once you have those customers, then the third thing that you need is courage, because what I see very often is that it's very difficult for product managers, so for people who are managing a certain business line or a certain product in a big company, they are not that keen on going out into the field and speaking to customers, which we think is a problem, and sometimes this is something that we supplement. Okay, so one of the outcomes of today will be that you will have to find some courage to go out and speak to customers, and to go out and speak to customers in a little bit different way that you are typically used to, because most of the companies, so most of the client contacts which they have is either a sales interaction, so you're going out, you're offering something, you're speaking to them in order to close them, so in order to close a sale, or you're speaking to them the other way around. So when you are already implementing the solution or you've sold and you're executing it and so on. Whereas right now we want to speak to them in a very different way, and I will tell you about that in a bit. So let's start with the methodology. The first thing that we need is the double diamond theory. Probably some of you have heard about design thinking as a methodology. It uses a double diamond. I'll show you that in a minute. The design thinking theory as such is already pretty old, and I'm quite surprised that it's only in the last 10 to 15 years that design thinking has been growing in popularity, and has been growing in popularity in terms of being used for developing new services. Because back in the 40s, when the British Design Council designed the design thinking theory, this was already the times when they were looking at how could we make products in an easier way, how could we have a structured approach to making products, and how to have a structured approach to creating things that people actually need. And back then it was mostly focused on designing products, designing physical things. And when we look at the design thinking process today, we all realize that this can very well be used for services as well, because they have very similar characteristics to physical products. And looking at it the other way around, if we spoke to industrial designers, then this is a very similar approach that they have when they are designing something physical. So let's imagine they're designing a new tool or they're designing a new chair. The steps that they follow are very similar. So what does it look like? How does the double diamond thing look? Well, this is the double diamond thing. It has two parts to it, hence the name, double diamonds. So in the first diamond on the left, we have the first stage, which we call. So we usually split the double diamond into 4 stages, as you can see here. So you have the 2 parts, research and empathy, as the first stage. Then you have the define stage, ideate prototype as the 3rd stage, and then validation as the 4th stage. Let's explain it from left to right. So the first part, research and empathy. At the beginning, we have to open our minds and go out into the field and explore. So this is the part when the McDonald's case study, when the professors, they went to the restaurant and started observing people. They started observing how they buy the product, what time they buy the product, are they alone? Are they staying in the restaurant? Are they going? So that was the first part. So watching people, looking at patterns. Second part of the research and empathy was when they actually started speaking to people, asking them what kind of job is the milkshake fulfilling for you. Okay, so they went out, with clear mind, and they started looking at what they see. And this is the part where we collect all the interesting data. We go out and we speak to people, we try the experiences on our own, we gather secondary data and logically also primary data by our own research. So once we have all this data, huge chunk of data, then we move into the define phase. And this is when they started reading those patterns and they started seeing, okay, actually these people are replacing their breakfast with the milkshake. Okay, so in the define theory, you are actually looking at, in the define part, sorry, you're actually looking at what are the interesting insights where we see an opportunity. Okay, so once we defined everything, we have a good brief for improvement. So instead of saying, how could we improve milkshake, we can say, how could we make the milkshake more suitable as a breakfast thing? Okay, so and that gives us, that moves us into the 3rd phase where we start ideating and prototyping. So we start coming up with all the ideas how we could make it better as a breakfast replacement. Because now we know, we define that people are actually using it instead of breakfast while they're driving. So now we can be looking only at new ideas which are in this sphere, and we're already solving a problem which is well defined. So let's say that in the 3rd part we come up with many ideas, we sketch few prototypes, maybe we design new packaging or whatever, so create a few multiple different new offers, and we go into the 4th phase where we have to validate them. Okay, so we try to think of some experiments, how to get customer feedback, how to show it to customers, maybe how to make some initial sales, so we also get some monetary feedback on the value of these improvements. And that's the design thinking process, explained in a very simple way. 4 steps. First, we have to go out and look for interesting insights. Then collect data. Then from all this data, we have to extract those interesting insights, upon which we then build new ideas and prototypes, and then we have to go into testing. What is very important with this is that we actually follow an iterative process. Okay, that's why we have those arrows on top and bottom. So whenever we get to the end and we collect some information, we collect some feedback, then it definitely makes sense to do the loop multiple times. Because if you do the loop only once, well, it's already better than nothing. But our experience is that it usually makes sense to do the loop at least 2 or 3 times, because you're refining it and you're increasing the fidelity. What is also important is that we do this rather quickly, and it also serves as a risk reduction thing, because if we already spoke to customers and we collected feedback and we are building something upon what we found out, it's already way better than coming up with a random idea in the office and then executing it. Okay, so let's dive into more detail of those 4 individual stages. So if you actually search for a double diamond or design thinking process, you might actually find already variations which have 5 stages. I even saw something which has 6 stages. It's pretty much the same all the time. That's why I tend to show and use only the initial 4 stages. It's easier to remember. So the first stage, which is discover, here we try to get as much insight about the problem which we are solving. So what are we trying to improve? Are we trying to find out how customers are using our service? How does it go from point A, so them thinking about it, all the way to the last part where we are in a post-purchase scenario. So here we have to think about how to get as much information, how to get as much data as possible. And there are multiple ways of doing it, and I'll show you a little bit later what are different types of possible strategies which you can use in order to collect all this interesting data. Once we have all this pile of data, then we move into the next phase. What I would also like to say here during discovery part, recently we were working on a project where we were helping a utilities company with their retail strategy for the next 5 years. So utilities is electricity and gas mainly. And they asked us to go out and speak to their customers because they don't really know them. They just know that the average age of their customer is 55, usually male. So this is the person who is signing the contract for the electricity and for the gas, and that's pretty much it. So we did about 75 interviews where we identified, I think it was 6 different personas of their customers, and then we supplemented it with a quantitative research. So we did a questionnaire which was somehow confirming those findings which we had. So what I wanted to say is that this research can be big, but the research can be also small, depending on how early you are in the process. If you have a big challenge, which they have about 550,000 customers, they had a big challenge. So also the research was big. But if you are thinking about launching your, online shop for a business which you have, you're also fine with doing smaller research. It doesn't have to be anything big, and it can be something which can be achieved in number of weeks, 1, 2, or 3 weeks. So this is something to keep in mind. So let's imagine that we have this huge pile of data, and now we have to start digging through this pile of data. So we have to start looking, what are the interesting insights? Are there any opportunities for improvement? Are there any patterns? Because during the define stage, we would also probably see patterns in different type of people that we spoke to. And that means that maybe this is the time when we identify different personas, so multiple different people who somehow share something in common. And by this, I mean, it can be something as some kind of a action which is similar, some kind of a need which is similar, some kind of a pain point which they share in common. So it's important to keep or to do this phase for long enough time in order to understand all the data that we gathered. Once we gathered all the data and everything is together, and we already see some patterns. Once we already see some patterns, then we move into the develop phase. In the develop phase, this is again something where we try to open up our mind as much as possible, and we try to brainstorm interesting ideas, interesting concepts. We try to come up with those actual solutions for those problems which we have. This you can imagine as huge brainstorming, where you do a little, you do some voting on the ideas, and then you take a few of those ideas and you try to develop them into something which is tangible, something which you can actually show to someone. And once you have this, then you naturally go into the deliver phase, where you want to test these ideas. And there are also multiple ways of testing this thing. This I will show you in a minute, and I will also illustrate it on an example. As I said, it has to be iterative, so that's why you want to start with something simple, and you want to move into more sophisticated parts, as you go through this iterative process. So, summing it up, the first tool which we need is to understand the design thinking methodology. Do some research, extract the data, come up with new ideas, and validate it. In a continuous cycle. And for each iteration that you go through, you are improving it, making it better, and so on and so on. Coming to the example part, this is something which I take from my experience at ŠKODA. One of the services which we were building was called Mobility with Care. When we started doing various different studies on how people are moving around, what are their mobility needs, how are they buying cars, how are they sharing cars, are they actually buying cars in all scenarios or not, we identified a quite interesting group of people, which we called the vulnerables. And those are people who are not so able to take care of their mobility needs by themselves. So, and as you see on the picture, these were mostly kids, 15 years and younger. And these were also elderly people. So elderly people either living at home alone or living in these elderly facilities, so senior homes. And we had few interesting insights from the studies which we found. We saw that they have a specific pattern of moving around with the elderly. It was things like going to the shops, going to doctors. With kids, it was a little bit different because they had that pattern in the morning. Then they had the pattern of mobility in the afternoon, but it was a little bit more sophisticated. And for both of these personas, you couldn't use a taxi because a taxi is, in our understanding, was a service which is only from a sidewalk to a sidewalk. Whereas it seemed that these people actually needed something which was beyond the sidewalk, so something which was from their door to their door, and the person would not only be a driver, but it would be someone who would be also helping them with those particular things that they need to achieve. So they were also at some point when we launched the service, they were also taking care of the kids for a few hours before parents arrived from work. With the elderly people, they were helping them with their shopping and so on. So it was something like a kind of personal assistant, but taking care mainly of the driving part and then also of the few parts on the side. So we created few propositions, we created few hypotheses, and then we launched this service in Munich with 4 cars. And this is where I want to stress the point of iterations. It's very important that it's an iterative process, because at the beginning we started with the hypothesis that it will be interesting for elderly people living at home and they will be able to order it on their own. So we did some marketing, we showed it in the local TV, we showed it in the local radio, in the local newspaper. We had some orders, but we didn't really have product market fit, so it wasn't getting off the ground. So we said, okay, here we have some feedback. We spoke to a few people. We found out that they're not so willing to order it on their own, but maybe if their grandkids would order it for them. So then that's where another hypothesis came around, that okay, maybe we should focus our marketing campaign on their kids. So we started focusing our marketing campaign on their kids. Again, we got some orders, but again, it wasn't something that we would run out of capacity right away. And here I want to illustrate the importance of going, iteration by iteration. We were changing our propositions, I think, every 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so we were doing it very quickly. In the end, we found out that the best proposition was to actually collaborate with elderly homes, and those would be ordering the service for their clients. And that's where we also got the highest lifetime value customers. But it took us some time because you never know at the beginning. You have multiple hypotheses and you go and you test them one by one in an iterative process and you're improving the service as you go. So this is very important when you're starting something new and you want to create a new revenue service, you want to improve your customer journey, you have to go through experimentation. So you have to try things, you have to try them quickly, and you have to be sure that you collect enough feedback. When we are at the beginning of problem solving, when we are, let's say, in the empathy phase, we always had to pose 3 important questions to ourselves. And these 3 important questions were what, who, and when, and we'll go through them one by one. So the first question is, which we always asked before we started doing any research, was, what do we know about this topic today? What do we know about the problem which is there? What do we know about the market? What do we know about the users? What do we know about the people who are actually doing some kind of an exchange there? So looking at the example of mobility with care, well, we had few interviews with personas which were parents, which were elderly, and so on. So we had some insights, but it wasn't too specific. We knew that they have special mobility needs, but that was pretty much it. So we looked at some research and we put down everything which we knew about this, not so much. Okay. Then we moved on to the second question. So what do we want to find out? And this is where the list got super long. Okay. This list got super long because we said we want to find out, when do they move around? What are the times? What would be the peak times? What kind of services they used before? Who particularly orders this? Who pays for this? What are the interactions? Good experiences, bad experiences? We wanted to speak to senior homes and see what their view on this is. We wanted to speak to the local municipality. We wanted to speak to drivers who are driving older people around, and so on and so on. Okay, so the list got super long. And based on that, we kind of structured our interview script, and I'll tell you about that just in a second. The third important question was, whom do we want to ask? Okay, so who are the people that we want to go out and speak to? Naturally, the future customers, yes, but there are also more, as I said, taxi drivers, people working in senior homes, local municipality. Always, when you have a problem that you're trying to solve, it's good to get multiple different views on that particular topic. So this is very important, and this is something to keep in mind. Okay, so whom do we want to ask? Now I would like to introduce you, when we are speaking about whom do we want to ask, I would like to introduce you to the concept of extreme users. Okay. Now you might be wondering, extreme users, what is so extreme about them? But it's way simpler than you can imagine. Extreme users are people who either have a lot of experience with using a particular service, a particular product, or on the other hand, they are someone who has, I call it beginner's eyes. So someone who is trying it for the first time. And these people are very much receptive to, small little details. They notice a lot of things. They notice a lot of changes, and they are pretty good because they can give you an interesting feedback on these things. So if I would have to sketch it, it would look something like this. Okay. So we have majority, and on one hand we have extreme users, and on the other hand, we also have extreme users in the other spectrum. To illustrate it with an example, back at ŠKODA, we were also looking at how we could improve the experience of buying used cars. And some of you who have bought used cars know that it's not the most pleasant experience for some people, especially for those who are doing it for the first time or who are younger. So we said, okay, we need to speak to quite a lot of people, and so extreme personas for us in this sense were people who have bought more than 10 used cars in their life, and also people who are buying it for the first time or who bought it for the first time. Because those which have done it 10 times, they will tell you all the important differences between each individual case, and that's super important because they'll tell you this is easier, this is more difficult, better, worse, blah blah blah. And those who have done it for the first time, they for them everything is new. So they will give you details about each thing which they witnessed, which they went through, which they thought was difficult, which they thought was complicated, which they didn't like, which they liked, and so on and so on. So keep in mind, extreme users. Think. When you're thinking about your project, when you're thinking about the stuff that you're working on, who could you speak to, and who would be the extreme user, extreme persona? One hand or the other, but ideally it's good to find people on both hands. Another example or another illustration would be think about airlines when they're improving their product. So the cabin or the boarding process or whatever. There you have also a nice example of extreme users. You have people who are flying for the first time or flying for the first time with that particular airline. So those are, on one hand of the spectrum. And then you have frequent flyers, people who fly hundreds of flights a year, and those notice very small little differences between experiences, and they can give you an interesting feedback on what is good and what is bad. Whereas the majority who flies, 2 or 3 times a year, not so much, because for them it's they've flown before, but they don't fly as much to notice the little differences. So they will give you some feedback, but usually the most valuable is on the edges, and that's what I want to stress here. That when you're thinking about whom to speak to, try to look at those edges if you can. Of course, this is not possible in every scenario, in every type of project, but it's good to keep it in mind because it's a theory that is very interesting, and it has given us a lot of interesting insights in the past. So slowly drifting towards getting some customer insights and how this is done. Well, what works best for us from our experience is that we actually employ the customer interview method. Speaking to customers in a way that is structured, in a way that is dedicated. So we're not speaking to them randomly on the street, but we are actually asking them to sit down with us for half an hour, 40 minutes, 1 hour, and we actually go through a structured script. Is very valuable because they will tell us stories from their experiences. We can ask them, questions about the things that we need information on, and this is very valuable. So, but when you want to speak to customers, you need to build an interview script, and this is a science on its own. So, building an interview script is something that is difficult at first, but once you get used to it, it's getting easier and easier. What is important with these customer interview scripts is that you cannot shoot the most difficult and the most sophisticated questions at the person at the beginning. Okay, so you need to, when you're doing these interviews, you need to create some kind of a relationship to that person. So you have to start in a nice way, in a very general way, and then as we progress through the interview, we go into something more specific, more detailed, and so on and so on. So building an interview script, very important. When we prepare ourselves, I'll share a few do's and a few don'ts with you, what is important and what is not. We have to be clear about, whom we're speaking to. So, if we have multiple personas that we are speaking to, we might as well have multiple different versions of the script because, one size doesn't fit all in all of the cases. So that's important. We also have to forget about everything that we know about the topic, because if we are too suggestive and we're telling people you do like this or we're doing interpretations for themselves, it's not so good. We want just the raw data. We pose a question, open question, and we let them speak. We let them tell us a story. We let them walk us through the last experience which they have. Questions such as, tell me about the last time you went to McDonald's and bought a milkshake, and tell me everything about it from the point you thought of going there all the way to you returning home. And they start speaking, and then you can start asking them questions such as why this, why that, dig a little bit deeper. But you don't want to suggest any answer. So, and that's the best when you forget everything about the topic which you know, and you just ask these pure questions. What we also do is that we put down all the questions which we can think of, and then we try to see, because we don't want to have 120 questions in the end. Okay, we want to choose these ones which are the strongest, which will probably give us the most insight. We put a few of those, and we also try to think of questions which are somehow reflecting our riskiest assumptions. So things which we are most scared of about that particular idea. Or that particular service, the things which, in terms of, let's say, the mobility with care with the elderly people, we were pretty afraid about pricing. So we started asking people about, how much do they spend on transportation, and then we tried to cross-calculate it on the background whether we wouldn't be too expensive. Okay, so there are things which you can think of as risky, and it's good to include those in the interviews group. Some of the don'ts, which I do not recommend, we never say that we work on an idea, and we never try to tell the person which we're speaking to, we don't tell them that we are looking for feedback on an idea. Okay, so we don't want to bias them into thinking that they should open up their mind and start shooting ideas. This is something we don't want to do. We want to examine the typical way of their life, so how they are functioning today and what kind of troubles and challenges they have with achieving that particular task which we are exploring. Leading questions also not good. So we don't want to give any of our emotions. We don't want to give any of our personal thoughts, because that would already kind of steer them in a direction, and we don't really do hypothetical scenarios. So imagine if you do. It's not good, because you're already taking them out of their natural habitat and you're forcing them to think about hypothetical scenarios. That usually doesn't work. One question which I do use at the end of the interview script is that imagine you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about that particular problem. What would it be? And that can give you some interesting insight, but I don't go into too much hypothetical stuff. Another 2 points, these would questions usually don't work. So would you pay for this? Sure. If they ask you, would you pay for a faster car? Yeah, but when you have to open your wallet, usually it's not that case. Okay, so we usually say that the biggest validation on an idea is that when the customer actually opens a wallet and is willing to pay, takes out their card, takes out some cash. This is the best validation. Whereas if they say, yes, I like it, I would buy it, it's not good enough. You have to do something more sophisticated than that. Some do's. So what is important? We usually start asking people, tell me a little bit about your background, where do you live, how do you work, what's your typical week, so we can qualify the person and we can say, okay, this person fits into that particular persona or that particular persona. So it's always good to start in a very wide fashion. What we also do is, and this is what I already said, ask about past behavior. So ask them, as I said, when was the last time you went to McDonald's to buy a milkshake? And tell me the whole experience. Because these stories, these are the most valuable, because people will tell you things which they don't realize that are important for you. And you are sitting there listening to that story, and you are just thinking, when should I ask the next why? Because the theory says that the most interesting insights are usually found on the fifth why. So you can imagine the interviewee as someone who is an onion, and you're slowly peeling the sides, and the most interesting insights are hidden somewhere halfway. Okay, so you have to peel that stuff around, and you get to to the important things. So that's why it says that we should ask a lot of, what, why did you do it this way? What were you thinking? And so on and so on. So they kind of open up and they tell you everything they know about it. You don't want yes and no questions usually. That's not giving you that much. What is also important is that it's good at the end if the interview went well and if the interview went smoothly. It definitely makes sense that you ask for contact to similar people. What is also important to stress here is that when we do these interviews, we also pay people something. We give them a small Amazon coupon, or we give them 10 euros or something. So they actually take it professionally, and it's not just a casual chat. And important, never do interviews on people whom you know, because there is already a special relationship. So we don't do interviews with family members. We don't do interviews with friends. Okay, we do. If we have these people in our pipeline, then someone else has to do it. Okay, someone who doesn't have a direct relationship to them, they have to speak to that person. It's very important. Okay, so just to keep in mind when doing the interview script, think of it like a funnel. At the beginning, you start with general questions, with questions that create some kind of a relationship and which help us qualify the person. So they tell us a little bit about their life, and then we start asking about past experiences. And those particular questions where we have some kind of a hypothesis, things which we are afraid of, and things where we want to get more understanding about that topic. And we can close off the interview by asking them for contact details to similar people. Makes sense. So let's imagine we have the interview script right now, and we're moving to the next phase. So we're actually finding these people. We're calling them up, we're getting people to interview. How are we gonna collect the information? So we're moving into the phase of empathy mapping. Okay, so how do we get into the head of the customer, and how do we somehow put down everything that the customer told us, and how do we put it down in a way that we can extract the information, that the information will be valuable, actionable, and something which will guide us through the design thinking process. Because keep in mind, we are still somewhere at the beginning. So we are just in the first phase. We are trying to extract as much data as possible. Okay. Keep in mind that you might get some pushback from your colleagues. Okay, usually what we see in the teams is that people they're usually very hesitant when we come to the part of actually going out into the field, speaking to people and collecting interesting customer insights. And they will give you maybe a few of these back as a user. I wouldn't do it. Our users are different. They won't do it this way, and I know what users think. Try to ignore it, okay? Usually the first design thinking journey is the most difficult, and I see it quite often when I do the short Google design thinking workshops. At the beginning, we have so much resistance, and people are like, no, we don't need to speak to customers. We know what they want. We already spoke to them, blah, blah, blah. Do it again. And after they do it for the first time, they realize that the idea they had about the solution at the beginning was totally different to what the customers actually wanted. So this process for many people is also pretty much an eye-opener, because there are just so many new things that you will collect without you knowing it, that it makes the whole process way easier. Okay, so whenever you get these, just say, please guys, let's at least go through this process once, and we will see what we get at the end. I mean, it's still pretty quick, so it's not gonna take too much time. Okay, so this was a short info between you finishing an interview script and going to do some interviews, because you might get a little bit of these at you. So empathy mapping. What is important? The good thing about the internet is that you have so many interesting canvases online which you can use. So you never have to come up with something on your own, because there is usually already a solution for whatever you need. So whenever we get to a problem of capturing data, of collecting data, of writing down all the interesting insights, there is already a canvas in place. So it looks something like this. I'll show you on 2 slides. What is also important is that naturally, you want to fill it in with real data. So you don't want to come up with things, come up with your own perceptions and come up with your own experiences. Okay, so this should be filled in with information that you collect, and it looks something like this. This is the empathy map canvas, which you can, if you are willing, then you can easily download it on the internet, and you can use it as an A3 or use it as a virtual PDF and fill stuff in. What is important is that it has seven phases to it. Okay, and we start on the top. So this is what I was saying when I said you have to qualify your person that you're speaking to. Okay, so in number 1, whom are we empathizing with? Okay, who is the person? What situation they're in, what role they're in, and this is the first part of the interview where I ask them, tell me a little bit about your background, tell me about your typical week, where you work, family status, and so on and so on. Okay, so because this is giving me information on how to frame that person and what bucket to put that person in. And then as they start speaking and we start asking them questions, we are capturing it in the respective areas. Okay, so what do they need to do? This is getting us into the concept of what job are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to get done? Okay, so when I'm speaking to people who are buying used cars, well, they're trying to buy a used car probably, and with some other explanation to it, cheaply, quickly, particular type, particular brand, and so on. But I want to capture as much information as possible into what are they trying to achieve. Okay. Then in the third part, we collect information such as what they see. Okay, so what's happening in the environment, what was their experience with buying it, what was their experience when they went to the market and they started purchasing, they started looking at things and so on. Everything that they saw, everything that they read, what are their feelings about it, and so on and so on. So it's important to capture it in this third part. Fourth, what are they saying about it? So what is their interpretation of what they saw and what they're trying to achieve? So what do they say about it? Okay? Are they seeing it positively, negatively? What was their experience to it, and so on? In the fifth part at the bottom, we capture information such as what have they done? So if we ask them about their previous experience, and they tell us the whole story of them going to a second-hand car dealer and they were looking at some things. This is where we capture the steps of the actions which they did, and we also capture how it made them feel, good, bad, and so on. In the sixth part, we also capture information from their peers. So if they say, my brother recommended me to do this and that, it's important to capture it there, because people are very often, influenced by their close relative circle, friends, family, co-workers, and so on. Sometimes they're also influenced by friends of friends. So there is some information that is passing, from a friend of friend to a friend to you, and they tell you something like, my friend told me that his friend had this kind of experience, and some people are influenced by that. So it's important that we capture this information. In the middle, and this is a very important part in the middle, so what were in the process, what were their pains? Okay, so they were afraid that the car is not was not maintained well. It's a pain. They were afraid that they would have to invest a lot of money into servicing after they bought. Okay, so list everything that they see as a problem at this point. And then on the other hand, you can also write down all the things which they wanted. So what were their hopes, their dreams? They tried to purchase the car cheaply. They try to purchase the car quickly. You know, things which were most of the times which were unfulfilled. Okay, and let's imagine that we fill in this canvas, you know, 10 times with 10 different interviews which we did. We will get a lot of data. A lot of data to process, a lot of experiences to think about, but also a lot of insights that we can extract and a lot of opportunities. So keep in mind that this canvas you can download easily. You will find it on the internet, and it's called the Empathy Map Canvas. You know, feel free to use it, play around with it. It's definitely something worth spending the time with and using when doing an interview. So moving along. Customer discovery process. So what did we say until now? Okay, so we said that it is important that we understand our customers. It's important that we understand what they are trying to achieve. We understand what kind of products and services they hired to fulfill a job until now. We also said that there is some kind of methodology that we can follow, and this was the design thinking methodology which we explained. The first part of design thinking methodology, the empathy part, which we consider as one of the most important, is that we do a structured interview. We go out, we speak to people, we capture experiences, and we gather a lot of data. Okay, and this is where we are standing right now. So let's imagine we gathered a lot of data, and we are looking through these insights. We're looking for the opportunities and so on. And what awaits us right now? Well, if we have found interesting insights upon which we can build a solution, well, then we move into the process of building it, validating it, and somehow de-risking it. Keep in mind the word de-risk, because this whole process, the whole design thinking process, is, as I said, a process of decreasing the risk of developing something that customers will not want. To illustrate the typical corporate example, and as I said before, you know, someone has a great idea, we should develop this and that, then we work on it for a few years, then we launch it and nobody wants it. And this is something that we try to avoid, because we're speaking on the level of small and medium-sized companies. You know, we don't have infinite budgets to spend money on product development, improvement, and so on. So we look for a way how to do this efficiently, how to do this quickly, cheaply, and how could we kill off those ideas which don't make sense before we invest significant amounts of money into it. Okay, so keep this de-risking concept in mind. Moving along to building a proposition. Again, using the value proposition canvas, you know, it's good that someone already created something that we can use, something that has been validated and that works. The value proposition canvas is a very simple tool, and it's a tool which we use very often because it's somehow matching what the customer is trying to achieve with our product, and it's also matching the pains and gains to the respective features of our product which we want to sell. So value proposition canvas looks something like this, and it has two parts to it. So in the red part, which is a customer profile, this is where we capture all the information which we gather from our research. Okay, so we need to do our research before we fill in the right part. And filling the right part in the customer profile part, well, what is the customer trying to achieve? Now let's take the McDonald's example to have a simple illustration. The person is trying to have breakfast in the morning while driving, so while commuting. So having breakfast while commuting is the customer job. What are the current pains that the customer is experiencing? Well, if they have a banana, they eat it too quickly. If they have a Snickers bar, they feel guilty because they're eating sweets before 9 a.m. Third point, when they're eating some bread with butter, they're afraid that they'll kill themselves. So also significant pain. What do they want? So what are their wishes is that they would have something which has enough energy that will sustain them until lunch. They would have something which they can easily consume while they're driving. And they want something which they will not finish in a minute. So they want something that's that they will consume during a significant part of their journey. Okay, so this is the customer profile of someone who is trying to solve the problem of having breakfast while driving. Now let's look at the other side. Let's look at the value proposition. So our product and service, well, our product is McDonald's milkshake, because it relieves the pains by taking 15 to 20 minutes to consume, being super easy to drive with, and not making you feel guilty when you buy it in the morning. And you create the gains. Again, this is very similar to pain relievers. You know, it's readily available. You can buy it every morning. You will not kill yourself when you're drinking it, and it's giving you enough energy to sustain you until lunch. Okay, so this is the perfect case scenario where we matched all the pains to pain relievers. We matched all the gains to gain creators, and we have a product which is matching the customer job. So if the customer is thinking about having breakfast in the morning while driving, well, the best thing he can hire for this job is a McDonald's milkshake. So think about this in terms of your product or service. You know, what are your customers trying to achieve? What pains do they have right now with the current solutions? You know, what gains are they looking for? And how is your product or service or the thing you are thinking about, how is this going to answer those challenges? So summing it up, looking at the customer profile, you know, gains are the benefits which the customer expects. And you know, one of the main benefits is that you will not kill yourself while eating bread in the car. Pains, so what are the negative experiences that the customer has currently with the current solutions? And we listed a few of those. What are the customer jobs? Okay, so we know that the task that they want to fulfill is to get some energy while they're driving, so they're killing this dead time of commuting. Easy. Value map. So that's the other part. You know, how is our product or how is our milkshake answering those gains which they want to achieve? How are we relieving pain of the competing products? Okay, so as we explained, those guilty part, speed part, and so on. And then what is the actual product that we're selling them? Okay, and that's the milkshake. What is important in this whole theory is that we actually do this on a repetitive basis. Okay, same as with the whole design thinking process, we want to go through something that you know, is iterative. So it would definitely make sense to go out again once we made some improvements on the product, to go out again and speak to these customers again and see, you know, whether it improved, whether we made it better, whether we made it worse, whether some new pain points arose, you know, whether there are some new expectations from the customer. So it's important to keep in mind that when you are developing a product, when you are developing a new service, at the time when you're trying to hit that product market fit, it's important that you do it in an iterative process. Okay, so you continuously improve and you continuously gather feedback, and based on that feedback, you make improvements, and then again you measure the impact of this. So keep in mind the proposition canvas. So again, if you want to download this, you will find it readily available online. It's pretty easy to find. It's a value proposition canvas, and you can try to fill it in for yourself. Maybe there are some blank points. Okay, so there are some question marks, some things which you don't have an answer for yet at this stage. Now this serves nicely as a map on, you know, where do I need to get some more customer data? Where do I need to do a little bit more customer research? So this is definitely something to keep in mind. So let's imagine that we build a proposition. You know, we have 1 or 2 or 3 different propositions, like we did for our mobility service in Munich. You know, we had a proposition for kids, so we had a proposition for elderly people, we had a proposition for senior homes. We have to test this somehow. Okay, and this is a very nice chart which is mapping all the different ways of mapping or of testing individual stages of product development, okay? Because if we feel at the beginning that we have a problem that we need to validate, well, as we said, the easiest thing is to do some interviews, customer reviews, speaking to customers, getting some problem interviews with them. So telling them the process which they went through and somehow writing down or telling us about the pains. Once we have the proposition, well, we have multiple ways of testing. This is in the green part. Once we have a value proposition, well, the easiest thing, or what we usually do the most, is when we have a new proposition for a product, we usually build some kind of a landing page, which is explaining what the product will do, what are the advantages, what is the pricing, and so on and so on. And then we run some kind of a digital campaign. Okay, so we do Facebook banners or Google ads, and we see how people are interacting. Are they clicking on these ads? Are they visiting our websites? Are they signing up for things? Sometimes we even do something like a fake sale. So we kind of guide the user through the checkout process, and then at the end of the checkout process, we either give them some credit or we tell them that we are still in development, sorry, we put you on a wait list or something like that. But this is giving us very strong validation, because as I said, you are not validating your product or service until the customer has opened the wallet. Okay, so with this, you're trying to make them open up their wallet and show that they would actually pay for this. Okay, so there are multiple ways of how you can test your value propositions. Pre-sales, solution interviews we don't do that often, because this is where you have to walk the customer through it, and I believe it's a little bit biased. So we rather work with things where we try to get people to sign up to do something. We get them on our landing pages, or we try to do some sales. Solution validation. So once we have a solution which is finished, so we're not only testing the proposition, but we actually have a solution. What I like to use most often is the Wizard of Oz MVP. It's also a theory that you make the product look as though it's complete, but you do everything on the background manually. And this is how we did the mobility with care example. It seemed similar to Uber, so there was an app to it, and once you ordered the service, it would show you that it's matching you to a driver and blah blah blah. It looked super sophisticated, everything is automatic. None of it was. We did everything manually on the background, matching customers to drivers, calling them up, and so on and so on. But customer had the experience of an automated service. The reason why we do this Wizard of Oz MVP is that it's way cheaper and way faster than actually coding everything and investing money into tech development, because you are not yet sure if the workflow will stay the same. Okay, so you kind of give yourself a little bit of a backdoor on, maybe we can change the workflow. If it's done manually on the background, we can change everything as we go, and we can test new hypotheses, and we can go through this iterative process. And once we arrive at something that works and that makes sense, we can always develop it, we can always code it, we can always make it more automatized. So this is something to keep in mind. Product market fit, this happens when we are already selling. So product market fit testing, this is where you try to see how, what kind of campaigns you have to be running, what kind of marketing channels you have to be running in order to decrease your cost of acquisition and increase your lifetime value. Okay, so this is the more sophisticated part, and most of the products which are new don't make it to this part. So most of the ideas, I would say, are killed in the value proposition validation, because although we develop, 10 different ideas, 8 of them we will kill in the process, and then maybe 2 of them make it to something realistic. And once it is realistic, then we also start thinking about the product market fit testing. But this is more about polishing the pricing strategy, polishing the sales strategy in terms of different channels. and then also doing a lot of A/B testing with different types of offers. Okay, so let's imagine that we have multiple hypotheses and we want to explore them. We want to test them. Okay, so summarizing the complicated graph two slides ago, we can ask questions and see how people react. We can create the quantitative surveys to gather some data. We can collect some pre-orders. We can run test ads and compare them. The ones on the bottom I prefer the most, because this is actually making the person do some kind of an action that is showing their interest. So this is the product and the market part. In terms of exploring the solution, we can show multiple different iterations of our landing pages, A/B testing. We can get people to use our beta, or we can ask them to help us with our minimum viable product. This is all possible. And looking at market, it's always good to get some data on how big the market is, how many people are visiting our page, so optimizing the SEO and comparing the marketing campaigns that get most traction. Okay, so summing up this testing part, what is very important is that once we have some kind of an insight, we take this insight, we build a solution around it, but we don't finish the whole thing. Okay, so we just build a proposition, and maybe we show a vision of the solution, and then we start testing. Okay, so we don't want to go through the whole process of having everything ready, having everything set up, and then launching it. We want to get it in front of the customer as soon as possible. And this is the idea that I would like you to keep when we finish this presentation. On one hand, the idea is that we want to collect as much interesting information from genuine clients or from people who are in that environment, upon which we can then build a solution. And then once we have a solution, or we have an idea about the solution, so we are able to form a proposition, then we go out and we show it to people. Okay, so we want to show it to as many people as possible in order to gather some data. And this data can be things such as, how much does it cost us that the person actually visits our website? How much does it cost us that the person signs up for our newsletter, that the person registers for a pre-sale, and so on and so on. Okay, there are multiple ways of measuring the call to action, but it's important that you measure and that you show it to the customer. Okay, so keep this in mind when you're thinking about the projects which you're working on. How could we test it partially at this stage? What could we show our customers in order to get some feedback, whether they are interested, whether they are signing up, whether they're opening their wallets or not. Keep in mind the opening their wallets part, because if you come up with experiments which will get people to open their wallets, well, you are halfway there. That's good. So that brings us to the end of the presentation, and let us do a short summary, what we spoke about. At the beginning, we opened up this talk with speaking about the McDonald's case. Okay, so McDonald's wanted to improve their offering in the milkshake category, and we spoke about the ways that they tried at the beginning. So they just randomly asked people how would they make the milkshake better, and they got some answers, but these answers didn't bring any results. So then they started this collaboration with Harvard professors, and they started I would call it the design thinking process of going to the restaurant, watching people, looking for patterns, speaking to these people, getting some insights. And this is where the jobs to be done theory came along. Okay, so they figured out that people are actually people have some jobs that they need to fulfill, and they're hiring some products or services for this. So at the beginning, this is what we realized, that it makes sense to speak to our customers, but not in a way where we ask them, how would you make this better, but actually exploring the scenario which they live in and what is it that they're trying to achieve. So that's very important. Then we spoke about the importance of actually having a methodology how to explore the problem, how to explore the customer a little bit more, how to get these interesting insights. And there I showed you the double diamond theory of design thinking, back from the 40s, which tells us that there are some 4 steps, and it definitely makes sense to go in an iterative process. And these 4 steps were the empathy phase, okay, so going out to the field, collecting data, the define phase, analyzing the data and picking those interesting insights, the prototyping phase, so coming up with many new ideas to the insights which you found, and then validation. Okay, so building a prototype and taking it out to the market, or showing it on in Facebook ads, doing a landing page, collecting some pre-orders, whatever, just to collect enough customer information to get some fuel for further validation. What we also said is that if we have 8 ideas or 10 ideas, we will kill most of them in the process, and that's also the reason why the process is iterative, that you have to do it repeatedly. And it definitely makes sense to come back to research once you have done some testing. So this was that part, and then we moved along and we spoke a little about how to construct an interview script. We spoke a little about how to what are the do's and the don'ts when you are doing the actual interview. That it makes sense to speak to extreme personas. Okay, so people who are somewhere on the edge of the spectrum. Then we spoke about, once we have all this customer data, how do we actually form it into a proposition which we can then use for testing. So we showed to ourselves the value proposition canvas, which on one hand had the jobs to be done, pains and gains, and then on the other it had the actual product and pain relievers and gain creators. So again, a simple canvas which you can use. And then as we moved along, we spoke a little bit about how this validation can actually happen, and how does the validation differ at different stages. So whenever you just have an idea at the beginning, you can just test the proposition. Once you already have a solution, you can start collecting pre-orders and doing some pre-sales. It's very valid. And we closed with recapping on the importance of doing this iteratively, doing this in a customer-centric way, and keeping in mind that this is an iterative process which has to start with the customer. So if there are 2 things that I want you to take away from this lecture, is that one thing is go out and speak to your customers and find out what problems they have and how you can solve them. Secondly, once you have a solution, go out and show it to people so you get some customer feedback, because that will make your life easier. You will get to a good solution faster, and you will achieve product market fit in a way which is faster, cheaper, and it will be better for customers. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I ask Ira. She will moderate this.
Yes. Thank you so much, Slavo. That was a very practical presentation, so I personally very much enjoyed it. But yes, we actually do have a few questions, and I would invite everybody, while me and Slavo are discussing questions, to meanwhile rate this lecture by going to menti.com and entering the code 18166998, and it also should appear on your screens. And while people are doing that, so Slavo, the first question is there any way how to observe potential customers online in order to understand what are these jobs that they are trying to do online?
If they are purely online, you can always try to, well, it always depends on the topic, okay? But we try to, it doesn't matter if it's online or offline, we try to look for people whom we can speak to at the beginning before we even start exploring it further. Okay, and that can be either actual users, or it can also be people who are somehow in that topic and they have some understanding of that topic. Watching them purely online, well, we have done testing in terms of websites, but this is something a little bit different. This is where you watch people, how they interact with a website or with a product, but getting that initial insight at the beginning on what they're trying to achieve, it usually starts better with speaking to them in person.
So still, even though they are completing some jobs in the online environment, we still want to talk with them in person, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And continuing maybe on that, so in the program, we have sometimes heard from our participants, especially those with well-established reputations, that they are a bit, reluctant, maybe sometimes a bit scared to go out and talk with the customers, and especially when they already are in the prototype validating phase, because they are afraid that they might damage their reputation and maybe scare off customers by showing them some unfinished products. Mm-hmm. So maybe you have any tips or tricks or maybe suggestions for that?
Yes, we saw this a few times before, that if it's a physical product or something in development, then customers or companies are reluctant to show it to their customers. What we saw that makes sense is that they actually try to look for someone whom they haven't sold to before. Okay, so if let's say they operate in a certain country, then it makes sense to maybe hire people from abroad to show the solution to them. And at first it might seem that it's difficult, but there are agencies who can recruit people to speak to from wide range of various companies. We also look for people to speak to through LinkedIn if we look for something very specific. So this pain or this worry can be mitigated by finding someone who is outside of the scope of their typical business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that could definitely be something, to find somebody who doesn't really know you so well, right? Mm-hmm. And also maybe continuing on that note, so there is one other maybe aspect that comes into play when the founders themselves or the employees of the companies are doing these interviews, and that is this subjective thinking, and also, of course, loving the products that you're making and that you want to make, maybe. So maybe you have any suggestions how to overcome this subjective part? Maybe it's better to outsource some parts of this process.
Yes, it's usually done this way, that it's outsourced. This is also the reason why companies and bigger corporates hire external agencies to do these researches for them. But it also then makes sense to also include those researchers in the product development, because if they just do the research and they give you the outcomes in a PowerPoint or wherever, sometimes this information can get lost. So sometimes interesting insights can get forgotten. Interesting insights can, just disappear, because usually the motivation of someone driving the initiative at the company is very strong. Okay, and it's difficult to persuade them to take this customer-centric approach and let themselves be guided by the customer insights rather than their own motivation. So yes, outsourcing it is definitely a way, and maybe this is an eye-opener for them, and they will be more willing to change the way that they approach this.
Thank you. And then I think this could be the last question. So can these methods that you presentation, like empathy mapping and jobs to be done and value proposition, can they also be applied when launching a new company or a business direction, or are they mostly used for existing services and revisiting and improving them?
No, this is actually very well usable for launching something new, because if you're launching a new company, you have some proposition which you're selling. So it definitely makes sense to test this at the beginning, and you're not launching a company just randomly. So you have some idea about whom your potential customers might be, what field you're operating in. So it definitely makes sense to follow the design thinking approach and get more accustomed on the relationship, get some feedback on your possible future competition, get some idea from your possible future customers, get some insights from experts, and craft your proposition based on that. So totally applicable, and this is something that we recommend startups do when they launch. So yes.
Okay, then thank you. I think we have now addressed all the questions that have come in. So thank you so much again for the presentation, Slavo. We will catch up with you in our today's workshop. And with those who are joining us for these lectures, we will meet again on 16th of November, when we will continue talking about our customers, but now talking more about creating customer experience and user experience and making it really, really nice. So with that, thank you so much and see you next time.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye-bye.